The wilderness is beautiful, but sometimes it's deadly. In the silence of the forest, under the shadow of mountains, unseen eyes are watching. Today, I'm sharing 3 true wilderness horror stories. Stories of isolation, terror, and survival that will make you think twice before hiking alone. From the dark banks of Lake Kawashiwi, to the whispering peaks of the Rockies, and the haunted depths of Black Pine Forest. These are the true experiences of people who came face to face with something they couldn't explain. If you dare, stay with me. My name is Daniel Reeves, and what I'm going to tell you has lived inside my memory for 10 long years. Even now, 34 years old, with a family and a job that keeps me grounded in city life, I cannot escape it. Some memories fade with time. This one has only grown sharper, like a scar that refuses to soften. Back in the summer of 2015, I was 24 and full of energy. I had just finished college, but instead of settling into a normal job right away, I decided I wanted one more adventure. I loved nature more than anything. My childhood was spent fishing on lakes with my dad, wandering pine trails with my friends, and pitching tents on cool summer nights. So when I found a seasonal volunteer opportunity with the Park Service up in northern Minnesota, I grabbed it without hesitation. The assignment placed me near the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, a massive stretch of land filled with endless forest, rivers, and lakes. For those who don't know, the Boundary Waters is no small park. It's over 1 million acres of wild land, with no big towns. No highways cutting through the middle. Just trees, water, animals, and silence. It's the kind of place where you can paddle a canoe for days and never see another person. Some people find it freeing. Others find it terrifying. I lean toward the first group. Or at least, I thought I did back then. My job as a volunteer was simple. I wasn't a ranger with a gun or a badge, just an extra pair of hands. I cleaned campsites, helped lost visitors, cleared brush from trails, and occasionally checked remote areas to make sure nothing dangerous was blocking paths. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Every day I woke up to crisp air, birdsong, and the endless smell of pine. One late July morning, my supervisor asked me to check a trail along the Kawashiwi River. It was one of the less used trails, about 12 miles long, winding through forest, swamps, and rocky ground before ending near an old ranger station that hadn't been active for years. He told me it was a simple assignment. Walk the trail, take notes, see if any trees had fallen across it, mark down animal activity, and report back. He said if I started early, I could be done in one day. I like to move slow, and I didn't mind camping. In fact, the thought of staying overnight in the wilderness, alone by a river, thrilled me. I decided I would make it a 2-day trip, hike in, sleep by the old station, and return the next morning. That morning the sky was bright blue, with only thin clouds floating far above. I packed carefully: sleeping bag, small tent, water filter, radio, map, compass, and a little food. My boots were broken in, my pack fit snug, and the trail was waiting. The first few miles were everything I loved about the outdoors. The Kawashiwi River moved alongside me, wide and calm, its surface sparkling in the sun. Pines rose tall and green on both sides, with birches mixed in, their white bark bright against the shadows. Birds called overhead, and squirrels darted across the path. The air smelled of sap, earth, and fresh water. It was quiet, but in the way wilderness is meant to be quiet, not empty, just calm. The kind of quiet that makes your mind slow down, your breathing even, your body feel alive. I stopped around noon at a flat rock that jutted over the river. I sat down, unwrapped a sandwich, and let my legs dangle above the water. The current was steady, flowing towards some faraway lake. carrying branches and leaves downstream. I watched it while I ate, the sun warm on my back, the breeze soft on my face. If I had turned back then, if I had gone home after that meal, my life would be very different today. But I didn't. I packed my bag, stood up, and kept walking. That was when things began to change. The first sign was the silence. I didn't notice it at first, but about an hour after lunch, I realized the forest around me had gone strangely still. No birdsong, no buzzing insects, not even the rustle of branches. The kind of silence that makes your skin prickle, like the whole forest is holding its breath. I slowed down. My boots crunched softly on the dirt, but that was all I heard. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a time of day. But unease crept into my stomach. Then I saw the prints. I came to a patch of soft ground near the river where the soil was damp. There, pressed clearly into the mud, were footprints. At first I thought they belonged to a hiker, but as I looked closer, my heart sank. They were shaped like human feet, but too long, at least 15 inches. The toes were wide, almost spread like fingers, and each step was deep, as if whoever left them weighed far more than a normal person. The stride was long too, longer than mine by far. I crouched down and touched the edge of one. Fresh. The water hadn't filled it yet. The tracks led from the forest down into the river, then back out again farther ahead, disappearing into the trees. I froze there, staring at them. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was just the mud stretching the shape. Maybe a bear had stepped oddly. Maybe someone with huge boots had been there. But none of those explanations fit. A cold wave moved through me, and I stood quickly, pulling my pack tighter. I told myself not to worry, not to let my imagination run wild. Still, as I kept walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. And that was only the beginning. The trail narrowed as the sun slid lower in the sky. Shadows stretched across the ground, thin and dark between the trees. I had walked nearly 10 miles now, my body tired but steady. I knew the old ranger station wasn't far, just a mile or two more, and I felt eager to see it. It would mark the end of the trail for the day. The Kawashiwi River bent and curved beside me, wide in some places, narrow in others. Its surface was darkening, the bright sparkle of the afternoon giving way to a deep gray sheen. The air grew cooler. Every breath filled my lungs with damp pine, and still, that silence followed me. I had grown used to wilderness quiet over the weeks of volunteering, but this was not the same. This silence felt heavy, like a lid pressed over the forest. It reminded me of the air before a storm, when birds vanish and even insects hide, sensing something is about to break. Only no storm clouds hung in the sky. The sun was dipping red and gold. The air was clear, and yet every living thing seemed gone. As I walked, I thought again of the prints I'd seen near the riverbank. They haunted my mind. I replayed the shape of them over and over. Too long, toes splayed wide, steps deep into the mud. Whatever had left them had walked into the water, then come back out again. The thought that it might still be nearby clung to me. Every rustle of leaves, every groan of tree branches shifting in the wind, made me turn my head sharply. I told myself it was nerves, nothing more, but my pace quickened all the same. At last, I reached the clearing. The ranger station stood at its center, a small wooden cabin, slumping with age. The roof sagged, one corner half collapsed, and the windows were cracked and dark. Grass and weeds grew wild around its edges. The place hadn't been used in years, maybe decades. Still, it felt like a safe landmark, a sign that I had reached my goal. I dropped my pack on the ground near it and breathed out, trying to shake the tension from my shoulders. I set up my small tent just a few yards away, close enough to see the river shimmer beyond the trees. Then I gathered dry sticks, struck a match, and coaxed a fire into being. Soon a small orange flame flickered, pushing back the growing dark. Dinner was nothing special. A pouch of dried food boiled with water. I ate quietly, staring into the fire, listening to the crackle of wood. For a while, I managed to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was just another camper enjoying a night in the woods. But when the sun slid fully behind the trees and the forest turned black, the feeling of unease returned sharper than before. The first sound, it began with a splash. Not close, not loud, just far down the river, as if something heavy had stepped into the water. I lifted my head, listening. A few seconds later came another, then another, irregular but steady. I set my tin cup down carefully, straining my ears. Splash. Pause. Splash. Something was moving in the river. I turned off my lantern, so the only light came from the fire. Darkness pressed in, the flames casting long, dancing shadows on the trees. My heart thumped faster. The sound grew nearer. Splash. Splash. Water pushing aside. Then silence. I stared at the river through the gaps in the trees, but saw only black water gleaming in the firelight. I told myself it was a moose, or maybe a beaver, but deep down I knew those sounds had not been the quick paddling of an animal. They had been steps, heavy steps. Minutes passed. The forest remained still. Slowly, I breathed again, forcing my shoulders to loosen. I added another branch to the fire, telling myself not to panic, but the silence never lifted. By midnight, the fire had burned low. I crawled into my tent, zipped it closed, and lay on my back in my sleeping bag. The fabric walls pressed close, thin as paper, separating me from the entire wilderness outside. Sleep came slow. Every creak of branches, every sigh of wind, made me hold my breath. Several times I thought I heard faint movement near the station, something brushing against wood, something shifting weight on old boards. But each time I listened hard, the noise faded. When I finally drifted off, it was restless. Dreams came in fragments, water rising black around my ankles, a shape moving in trees, footsteps behind me on the trail. Then I woke, not from a dream, from a sound, the sound of steps. At first I thought it was my imagination, but no. The sound came clear, a heavy footfall on soft ground. Then another, then another. They were slow, deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause, as if something was circling. I lay frozen, my hands clutching the sleeping bag tight. My breath came shallow. The steps moved closer, circling the tent. They stopped right by my head, just a few feet away. That was when I smelled it. A stench rolled through the air, thick, wet, and rotten, like fish left too long in the sun, mixed with mud and decay. My stomach turned. My eyes watered. I pressed my lips together hard, terrified that even the smallest sound would draw it nearer. The thing outside breathed. I could hear it low, slow, heavy. A deep rasp, as if lungs too large for a human body dragged in air. I cannot explain the fear I felt in that moment. It wasn't the normal fear of a wild animal. It was something older, colder. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, yet I couldn't move. The steps shifted. Slowly, they circled to the other side of the tent. Again they stopped. Again I heard breathing. Minutes passed like hours. Then, at last, the steps moved away. Soft at first, then fading into the forest. I lay motionless until the first gray light of dawn touched the tent walls. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, the fire was dead. The ground was wet with dew. And there, pressed clearly into the soil all around my tent, were footprints. They matched the ones I had seen at the river, long, wide, human-like, but wrong. 15 inches at least. toes spread wide. Deep impressions, as though something massive had stood there. They circled my camp. They stopped just 3 feet from where my head had been while I lay inside. The trail of prints led back into the trees, then down toward the river. The mud near the water was torn up, as if something had dragged itself in. I stood staring, my body trembling. The silence of the night, the stench, the slow steps, all of it rushed back. I knew then I wasn't alone. That was the moment I decided I had to leave. But the forest wasn't finished with me yet. The sun had just begun lifting above the pines when I made the choice. I wasn't going to finish the assignment. I wasn't going to sit and write careful notes about downed trees or beaver activity. I wasn't going to stay another night in that place. I was leaving. I moved fast. My hand shook as I stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack, rolled the tent into a tight bundle, and shoved everything into my pack. My body was exhausted from the night, but fear gave me strength. My thoughts kept circling back to those tracks, pressed into the soil, so close to where I'd been lying. Too close. I didn't eat. My stomach couldn't take food. I just slung the pack over my shoulders, kicked dirt over the ashes of the fire, and started down the trail toward home. For the first mile, every sound made me twitch. Every shadow looked alive. The trees leaned close above, branches swaying in a morning breeze, but that breeze carried no comfort. I felt hunted. The worst part wasn't what I saw, but what I imagined was behind me. The trail wound endlessly through the forest, each bend revealing more trees, more undergrowth, more silence. The Kawashiwi River stayed near, glinting through the gaps. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain that any second I'd see it, the tall, dark shape of whatever had stalked me. I saw nothing, but I felt it. Sometimes I heard noises, the faint snap of a branch, the distant splash of water, the crunch of something heavy moving far off. Each time I froze, listening. Each time I convinced myself it was just the forest, though I didn't believe it. Hours passed. My boots scuffed dirt and stone. My shirt clung damp with sweat. The July sun rose higher, but instead of warming me, it seemed only to push the silence deeper. Once, around midday, I came to another muddy patch near the river, and there they were again. Prints, fresh ones, the same long, wide feet pressed deep into the ground, crossing the trail ahead of me and vanishing into the trees. I stopped cold, my heart hammered. I looked around, eyes darting from trunk to trunk, shadow to shadow. The forest stood empty, but the message was clear. It wasn't gone. It was moving, watching. I nearly turned back toward the ranger station, even though the thought of staying another night there made my skin crawl. But I forced myself forward. The only way out was through. Late afternoon bled into early evening as I pushed on. My legs ached, my mouth was dry, but I didn't dare stop for long. Resting felt dangerous. At one point, as I crossed a ridge where the trail sloped high above the river, I saw movement below, a shape gliding between the trees. It was tall, taller than any person, its shoulders hunched forward, arms swinging unnaturally long. Its head bent low as it moved, but not like a man tired from walking, more like something sniffing, searching. I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath, heart slamming against my ribs. I watched through the branches as the shape moved slowly, silently, parallel to the river. Then it slipped into shadow, and I lost it. I stayed frozen for long minutes before I dared move again. By the time I reached the last stretch of trail, the light was fading. My pack cut into my shoulders. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't slow. That last hour felt endless. Every step I took, I imagined steps behind me, just out of sync. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch. I gripped the straps of my pack until my knuckles went white. Finally, through the trees, I saw it. The trailhead sign, the dirt road beyond it, and my old car parked in the gravel. Relief surged through me, so strong I nearly cried. But even then, I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I reached the car, threw my pack in the back seat, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights cut through the trees, and for one last moment I thought I saw something move at the edge of the beam. Something tall, something still. Then I pressed the gas, and the forest disappeared behind me. I never reported what happened. I told my supervisor the trail looked fine, though I skipped details. Maybe he knew something was off. He raised an eyebrow at my short answers, but he didn't push. I drove home a week later when my volunteer time ended, and I swore to myself I'd never return to the Kawashiri River, but it hasn't left me. At night, I still dream of that silence, heavy as stone. I wake up sometimes to the memory of slow, deliberate steps circling me in the dark. And worse than dreams are the smells, sometimes, in the middle of the city. In the middle of a normal day, I'll catch a sudden whiff of rotten fish and damp earth, and my stomach turns cold. I've told no one this story until now. People would laugh. They'd say it was fatigue, imagination, nerves. But I know what I lived. I know what I heard outside my tent that night. I know what I saw moving between the trees. And I know this. The wilderness is not empty. Something lives out there. Something that does not want to be found, but does not mind letting you know it's near. I will never go back to that river, because whatever walked there, whatever circled my tent and left those prints in the mud, it is still there, watching, waiting. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 38 years old now, living quietly in Denver, Colorado. Most people who know me see me as a calm, rational man who works in logistics and spends weekends with his family. They don't know about the mountains. They don't know about what I heard and saw years ago, on a trip I should never have taken alone. It was September 2014, and I was 27. I was strong, restless, and in love with the outdoors. I grew up in Colorado, so the Rocky Mountains were my backyard. By then I had hiked dozens of trails, some at smaller peaks, and spent many nights under the stars. My gear was good, my legs were steady, and my pride was stronger than my caution. That autumn, I took vacation from work to attempt a solo trek across a section of the Rockies south of Estes Park. My plan was to hike a multi-day loop, following trails that cut across ridges, descended into valleys, and circled back. I wanted solitude, silence, and the challenge of carrying everything I needed on my back. I started on a clear morning. The air was crisp, the sky sharp blue, the peaks rising ahead of me like giants. Aspen leaves had just begun turning gold, glowing bright against dark pine. The trail was steep but beautiful. I felt alive with each step. The first day was smooth. I climbed high ridges, drank cold water from streams, and watched hawks circle far above. In the evening, I pitched my tent in a valley surrounded by granite walls. I cooked a simple meal, listened to the rushing of a stream nearby, and slept well. But the second day was different. The weather turned, not with clouds or storms, but with a strange stillness. The wind that usually flowed through the mountains vanished. The air pressed down, heavy and unmoving. Even the animals seemed to have disappeared. I hiked along a narrow ridge, rocks crunching under my boots, and realized how quiet it was. No bird calls, no marmots whistling, no rustle of small animals in the brush. Only my breath and the echo of my own steps. At first, I enjoyed it. Solitude was what I had come for, after all. But then, in that silence, I heard something else. A whisper. It was faint. So faint I thought it was the wind moving through cracks in the rocks. But the wind wasn't blowing. The sound came again, soft, stretched, almost like words carried from far away. I stopped, turned my head, scanned the ridge. Nothing. Only boulders, lichen, and sky. I kept walking, telling myself it was imagination, maybe air pressure in my ears. But unease began to grow inside me. Later, as I descended into a basin, I found something that unsettled me more. A stone circle, carefully arranged, tucked between boulders where no casual hiker would go. Inside the circle were bones. Small ones, scattered, picked clean. Rabbit or bird maybe, but arranged neatly, deliberately. It looked ritualistic, though I hated that word in my mind. Who would come all the way up here to do that? I left quickly, my boots crunching too loud on the stones, my shoulders prickling as if unseen eyes followed me. By late afternoon, cloud began to gather, gray and low. I decided to camp on a high ridge rather than push into another valley. I found a flat patch between rocks, set up my tent, and boiled water for a meal. But as the light faded and the cold crept in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, as the sun dropped behind the jagged peaks, the silence grew so heavy it felt alive. Usually, in the mountains, nights are never truly quiet. There are insects buzzing, owls calling, coyotes yipping somewhere in the distance. But up on that ridge, I heard nothing. Not a single wing beat or rustle in the brush. The air was sharp with cold. My breath hung in pale clouds. I lit my small camping stove, warmed a pouch of food, and tried to eat. But the stillness pressed against me so hard that I felt every chew echo inside my head. I finished quickly, packed my things back into my bear canister, and crawled into the thin fabric of my tent. I told myself I'd be fine. I had done harder trips. I had camped in worse places. I zipped my sleeping bag, tried to settle, and listen to the rhythm of my own breathing. That's when the whispers came again. At first, they were faint, like before, long stretches of almost silence where I thought I'd imagined it. Then they came clearer, carried across the ridge as if the rocks themselves were mouths. The sound wasn't like language I knew. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I could recognize. It rose and fell in broken patterns, like fragments of words torn apart by distance. Sometimes it sounded far away. Sometimes it sounded just outside the thin nylon wall of my tent. I froze. My chest tightened. My mind raced through every explanation: wind, stress, fatigue. But when I pressed my hands to my ears, the sound didn't stop. It wasn't only in the air. It was inside me, moving through my skull like a vibration. I tried to focus on logic. Maybe sound was bouncing oddly between cliffs. Maybe my brain was replaying echoes from earlier in the day. But then something else happened. The ground shifted. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a rockfall. It was softer, smaller, like footsteps pressing onto the soil around my tent. I held my breath, heart hammering, listening. Slow, measured steps circled me. Not animal steps, too heavy, too deliberate. I wanted to unzip the tent and shine my headlamp, but I couldn't move. I lay still, gripping my sleeping bag as if it could shield me. The steps stopped at my head. Silence. Then the whispering swelled louder now, as if whoever, or whatever, stood just inches away was bending down, speaking directly into the fabric. The sound rattled through my skull. My vision pulsed with dark shapes, though my eyes were shut. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, maybe hours. Time twisted in that place. All I know is that eventually, I lost control of myself. My body jerked, and I screamed. Not a word, just a raw burst of fear. And everything stopped. The whispers cut off. The steps vanished. Only the ringing in my ears remained. I scrambled, unzipped the tent, and shone my light across the ridge. Nothing. Just black boulders, twisted pines, and cold night air. But the silence wasn't gone. It was worse now. Heavier, like something waiting. I sat there, light shaking in my hand, until exhaustion finally pulled me back into the tent. Sleep didn't come, not really. My eyes closed, but every small sound, the fabric shifting, the stove clicking as it cooled, jolted me awake. When dawn finally broke, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. My body was sore, my eyes bloodshot, but I was alive. The mountain, though, seemed different. The ridge that had looked majestic yesterday now loomed like a prison wall. I knew then that my trip was over. I had planned for several more days, but I couldn't. Something was wrong here. Something was watching, and it wasn't finished with me. When the first light of morning touched the peaks, I was already packed. My hands shook as I shoved my gear into my backpack. My food tasted like dust in my mouth. I didn't care about the trail loop I had planned. I didn't care about finishing what I had started. I just wanted out. The ridge stretched in front of me, sharp and empty under the pale sun. I walked fast, boots striking hard against the rocks, lungs tight in the thin air. Each step felt watched. I didn't turn around, not at first, but the pressure on the back of my neck grew stronger with every mile. The silence clung to me. It wasn't natural silence anymore. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. As I descended toward the tree line, the whispering began again. It rose with the daylight, not hidden in the dark this time, but drifting clearly from the rocks and trees around me. Sometimes it came from behind, sometimes ahead, sometimes from the side. Every time I spun around, I saw nothing but the emptiness of the trail. I walked faster. My legs burned, but I pushed them harder. I told myself it was just my imagination, the strain of the hike. But then I saw it. Far across a slope of scree, half hidden among the boulders, stood a figure. It was distant, too far for detail, but the shape was wrong. It was tall, its limbs too thin, its head bent at an unnatural angle. It stood perfectly still, watching. The sunlight should have cast its shadow across the rocks, but there was none. I froze. My throat closed. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, as I blinked, it was gone. The whispering surged louder. I ran. My pack slammed against my shoulders. My breath tore in my chest. The trail blurred under my boots. Branches whipped against my arms as I plunged into the forest below the ridge. But the forest wasn't safety. It was worse. The trees pressed in around me, their trunks black and close. The whispering slid between them, threading through the needles, echoing in voices that were no longer faint. They were sharp now, hissing, urgent, as if calling me by name, though I couldn't understand the words. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. The ground was uneven, rocks hidden beneath roots. Every snap of a twig behind me felt like a footstep. Every shadow between the trees looked like a figure about to step out. I don't remember how long I ran. My body moved on panic, not reason. My only thought was down, 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 get out, get away. At last, the forest thinned, and I broke out onto a dirt service road. I stopped, gasping, sweat freezing against my skin. The whispering was gone. The silence lifted, replaced by the normal sounds of the woods. Birds calling, wind in the branches, the distant rush of a stream. The world felt real again. I stumbled down that road until I reached a ranger station near dusk. The ranger on duty asked if I was all right, but I didn't tell him the truth. I just said I'd gotten sick and cut my trip short. He looked at me strangely, maybe because of my wild eyes, maybe because I reeked of sweat and fear, but he didn't press. I drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. When I walked into my apartment, my girlfriend asked me why I'd come back early. I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words for what I'd experienced. Even now, years later, I can still hear it sometimes. On quiet nights, when the city outside my window grows still, I'll catch a faint sound drifting through the silence, a broken murmur, like words carried across a long distance. It crawls into my ears, rattles in my skull, the same way it did on that mountain ridge. I don't go into the Rockies alone anymore. I tell people it's because life is busier, because I don't have time. But the truth is simpler. Something in those peaks is waiting, watching, whispering, and I'm terrified that if I go back, it won't let me leave again. I am Daniel Hayes. I am 41 years old now, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Most of my days are quiet and simple. I work part-time in a bookstore, and on weekends I sometimes walk with my wife along the river trails near the city. People who know me today would probably call me calm, maybe even ordinary, but they do not know what happened to me in the summer of 2016. They do not know about the weeks I spent deep inside the black pine forest of Idaho, and how I came out of that wilderness a man I barely recognize. At that time, I was 32 and living a very different life. I was a freelance wildlife photographer, obsessed with documenting animals in the most remote places I could reach. It was not just a job for me. It was an obsession that had grown since I was a boy with a second-hand camera, chasing birds through the woods near my home. By 2016, I had already traveled to Alaska, Montana, and the Canadian Rockies. But I wanted something wilder, lonelier. That was how I came across Black Pine Forest. Most people outside Idaho have never heard of it. Even some locals don't know much about it. It lies in a remote section of the state, far from towns, with only a handful of rough service roads cutting into its edges. The forest is old, heavy with pine and fir, its floor thick with moss and shadows. It has valleys so deep they never seem to see full daylight, and ridges that stretch sharp against the sky. I had read old reports that cougars, wolves, and even bears moved freely there, less disturbed than in other areas. For a photographer like me, it sounded perfect. My plan was simple. Spend 2 weeks alone in the forest with my camera gear, camping light and moving deeper each day, photographing whatever wildlife I could find. I told myself it would be a chance to capture rare shots of wolves, maybe even a mountain lion. I told myself it would also be a test of my survival skills. On July 9th, 2016, I drove out from Portland in my old Jeep. The drive took nearly 10 hours. The highways thinned into narrow roads. The towns became fewer and farther apart, until I found myself bouncing along a cracked service road into the green darkness of black pine. I parked near the end of the road, with the forest pressed in close, and the dirt path ahead was too narrow for the Jeep. The silence there was heavy but beautiful. No sounds of cars, no voices, only the wind moving through the tops of the trees and the faint creak of branches rubbing together. I loaded my backpack carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, stove, food packed tight in sealed bags, water filter, bear spray, 2 cameras and lenses. It was heavy on my shoulders, but I was used to it. With one last glance at the Jeep, I stepped off the road and into the trees. The first miles were calm. Sunlight filtered down in golden shafts, breaking through the canopy. The air smelled sharp with pine. I saw squirrels darting across fallen logs, and once, a hawk gliding silently overhead. I stopped often, snapping photographs, crouching low to capture angles of mushrooms, insects, and bark textures. By late afternoon, I had made good progress. I set up camp in a small clearing near a stream, the ground soft with needles. I boiled water, cooked a simple meal, and then wandered with my camera until the light faded. It felt peaceful. I thought I had found my paradise, but the deeper I went, the less peace I found. On the 3rd day, I noticed something strange with the animals. Usually, forests are alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing. the occasional rustle of larger creatures. But in black pine, there were long stretches of silence. I would walk for hours and hear nothing but my own steps. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then, all at once, I would hear frantic noises, squirrels chattering madly before vanishing, or a flock of birds exploding from the canopy, as if fleeing something unseen. The changes were sharp, unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath, and then gasping all at once. I also began to notice shapes at the edge of my vision. I would pause on the trail, lift my camera, and think I saw movement among the trees, tall, thin shadows slipping between trunks. But when I focused, there was nothing. Just the stillness of pines and firs, the sway of branches, the dimness under the canopy. On the fifth night, I set camp near a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Endless dark green stretching in every direction, ridges rising like frozen waves. I stayed awake late, watching the stars appear. My fire burned small but steady. That was when I heard it, the first sound that did not belong. It came from the valley below, a cry. At first I thought it was an elk or maybe a coyote, but the sound stretched longer than any animal call I had ever heard. It rose, cracked, then dropped into a low groan that made the hair on my arms lift. It sounded almost human, but not quite. Something in the tone was wrong, like words twisted into pain. I froze, listening hard. The cry came again, closer this time. My camera hung around my neck, but I didn't raise it. Some instinct told me not to move. Then silence. The fire crackled. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. I sat rigid until exhaustion forced me into my tent. Even then, sleep came only in fits, broken by dreams of long shadows crawling over the valley floor. That was the beginning. I told myself it was only an animal. I told myself I was tired, letting imagination play tricks. But deep down I felt it. Something was wrong in Black Pine. Something was watching me. And as the days passed, the forest would show me just how true that feeling was. By the sixth day, I had moved deeper into the forest. My original plan of photographing known trails had long been abandoned. I had begun following small game paths and narrow ridges that cut into unexplored areas, always keeping my pack light, my camera ready. Every day, I felt more alone, and yet more aware of the forest around me. At first, the signs were subtle. I noticed broken branches where no wind should have caused them. Pine needles pressed into soft earth seemed shifted, almost like footprints, though nothing matched human or animal patterns I knew. Once, I thought I saw a black shape slip behind a thick clump of firs. My heart jumped, and I raised my camera to capture it. But when I focused, the shadow was gone. Nothing remained but the forest, silent as before. Nights became worse. I was camping in a small clearing one evening when I first realized that something was watching my tent while I slept. My fire had burned down to embers, and I had drifted in and out of a restless doze. A faint scratching sound awakened me. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing the tent, but the sound persisted, soft, deliberate, moving along the edges of my small clearing. I lay still, listening. The noise circled me, not like a raccoon or other small animal, but something heavier, larger. I dared not look. The hairs on my arms stood straight. The air itself seemed to thicken. Then came the whispers. They were different from the cry I had heard in the valley days before. These were soft, broken, almost inhuman. They carried over the clearing, sometimes close to my tent walls, sometimes fading into the distance. I could not understand them, yet they felt meaningful, as if they were calling to me, or perhaps warning me. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my knees drawn to my chest, watching the dying embers of my fire. Each crackle and pop made me jump. Occasionally, I thought I saw movement outside, but whenever I aimed my camera or headlamp, the clearing seemed empty. The next morning, I discovered my supplies disturbed. My food bags had been moved slightly. A small knife I kept on the edge of my pack was lying in the dirt several feet away. My stomach turned. There was no animal that could have done that so quietly, so deliberately. I couldn't explain it. I considered leaving then, immediately. But curiosity, stubbornness, and a desire to capture something unique kept me moving deeper into the forest. On the 8th day, I stumbled across old logging cabins, hidden in a thick grove of pines. The buildings had long been abandoned, the wood gray and splintered. Moss climbed the walls, and the roof sagged dangerously. I had no idea they were here. They did not appear on any map I had consulted. Something about the cabins was wrong. I approached cautiously, camera ready. The doors were open, creaking faintly in the breeze. Inside, I found walls scratched with patterns, strange symbols, jagged lines, and something that looked like tally marks repeated again and again. On the floor, I saw small piles of ash and blackened stones arranged in careful circles. I stayed only briefly, snapping photographs, but the feeling of being watched was immediate and intense. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave, but before I could step outside, I thought I saw something move just beyond the broken window frame. A figure, or perhaps a shadow, gliding between the trees, too dark to distinguish. I ran the rest of that day, descending into a narrow canyon to distance myself from the cabins. But the unease did not leave me. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trails I had walked confidently now felt like mazes. Landmarks seemed to change overnight, hills appearing steeper, paths looping in ways I could not remember. Over the following nights, the terror grew. Each night I set up camp. I would hear scratching, soft steps, and whispers circling my tent. Occasionally, my camera equipment would be moved slightly, or I would find footprints pressed deeply into the soft ground, circling the perimeter. The prints were wrong, elongated, with toes splayed wide, and too large for any human I knew. I never saw the source directly, at least not fully. Just glimpses, a dark shape between trees, a tall silhouette on a distant ridge, or a flicker of movement that vanished when I turned my head. One night, I awoke to the smell of rot and decay. It was thick, sour, crawling into my nose, making my stomach heave. I unzipped my tent slightly, peering out. In the faint moonlight, the ground around me was disturbed. Twigs snapped quietly under weight. Something was moving just beyond the firelight. I could feel eyes on me. I stayed motionless for hours, listening to the forest breathe around me. The whispering would rise and fall, sometimes coming from multiple directions at once. Sometimes it was so close it felt as if it was inside my head. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, hunger, fear amplified in isolation. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something intelligent, something ancient. On the 11th night, I had a direct confrontation. I was walking a narrow ridge, camera slung over my shoulder, when I noticed a movement near a copse of firs. A figure stepped from the shadow, taller than a man, thin, with limbs bending oddly. Its face, or where the face should have been, was a darkness, smooth and featureless. I froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The figure stood still, watching. It did not speak. It did not move closer. Just observed. Then, as if deciding I was not worth its attention, it disappeared between the trees in a single, fluid motion, vanishing into shadow. My knees trembled. My heart pounded, so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached a small creek, with a sound of rushing water finally calmed me slightly. But I knew I could not stay in that part of the forest. Whatever I had glimpsed was aware of me, tracking me, testing me. That night, I made a vow. I would leave Black Pine Forest at first light. No photographs, no deeper exploration. Survival was now the only goal. I woke before dawn on the 12th day, my body stiff and my mind on edge. Every night in Black Pine had drained me, but last night's encounter on the ridge left me trembling with fear I could not shake. I packed my tent quickly, barely tasting breakfast, and kept my eyes on the trail. The forest was calm, deceptively so, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to move quickly, but the terrain was deceptive. Slopes that had seemed manageable the day before were now steeper, slippery with loose pine needles and hidden roots. The deeper I moved, the stranger the forest became. Trails twisted in ways I could not remember. Landmarks I had passed earlier appeared in different locations. My sense of direction, once reliable, now failed me. The whispers returned almost immediately. Low, soft, incomprehensible voices weaving through the trees, carrying a rhythm too deliberate to be accidental. Sometimes the sound came from above, echoing off cliffs, sometimes from below, bouncing across ravines. I could not tell where it came from, but I knew it surrounded me. By mid-morning, I realized the whispers were following me. Each time I stopped to check the trail, I would see shapes between the trees. Dark figures, too tall, too thin, moving with unnatural fluidity. I would raise my camera to document them, but as soon as I focused, the shadows vanished, leaving only the forest behind. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. The fear in me had become a living thing, urging me forward, pushing me through the labyrinth of trees, rocks, and brush. I stumbled down a narrow slope and almost fell into a ravine. My hands scraped against sharp stones. My knees tore on brambles, but I continued. Survival left no room for hesitation. As the sun climbed high, I heard it. The sound of steps. Not human steps, but heavy, deliberate, moving fast through the underbrush. My heart leapt. I had been careful, always alert, always moving. How had it found me? I ran. My pack battered my shoulders. My camera swung against my chest. The steps behind me grew louder, closer. Branches whipped my face. Roots tripped my feet, but I didn't stop. Every second counted. I reached a small clearing and glanced back. A figure stood at the edge, its body unnaturally tall, limbs bending at odd angles, its head tilted, featureless darkness where a face should have been. It did not run toward me. It did not move quickly. It only watched, waiting, and then, when I blinked, it was gone. I kept running, deeper into the forest, trying to follow a vague trail I hoped would lead to the service road. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I could not tell. Time felt broken, stretched by fear and exhaustion. The forest closed around me, trees forming walls of green and shadow. By late afternoon, I realized I was lost, completely lost. Every ridge looked the same. Every valley mirrored another. I could hear the distant rush of a stream, but I could not find it. The whispering persisted, sometimes coming from everywhere at once, sometimes from a single direction, always teasing, always close. I stumbled across more abandoned cabins, smaller this time, hidden under moss and ivy. Their windows were dark, their doors creaking. I felt the same dread as before. Inside, the floors were covered with ash, stones arranged in patterns, strange carvings on walls. I tried to leave quickly, but as I stepped outside, I noticed prints in the soft soil. Huge, elongated, splayed wide, moving in circles around the cabin. Something had been here while I was inside, something that had waited. I dared not rest. I had no energy to climb higher, no courage to descend blindly. The shadows seemed to grow with each step. Every tree became a potential watcher, every ridge a hiding place. Night fell suddenly. The forest became suffocating, the darkness nearly solid. I stumbled into another small clearing, my only thought to keep moving, to find a road, a river, anything familiar. The whispers turned to hissing, closed now all around me. I could feel a presence, brushing against my mind. My camera flashed automatically as I tripped, revealing fleeting shadows that vanished before I could focus on them. I knew then, I could not outrun them forever. Whatever they were patient, intelligent, and relentless. I dug through my pack and found my small survival knife. I didn't know if it would help. I didn't know if it mattered, but holding it gave me some small measure of control. I walked slowly, trying not to run, trying not to draw attention. But my instincts betrayed me. A sudden noise, a snapping branch, made me bolt forward, adrenaline pumping, legs screaming. Hours later, just before dawn, I stumbled onto a faint trail. My body was battered, my mind fraying, but I followed it desperately. The whispers receded, though I could still feel eyes on me, following me through the darkness. Finally, I saw a faint outline of a dirt road. My Jeep, parked nearly 2 weeks earlier, was visible in the pale light. I collapsed beside it, trembling, sobbing, exhausted beyond comprehension. I did not stop to check for shadows. I did not look behind me. I started the engine and drove away, leaving black pine forest behind. I never returned. I quit photography trips into deep wilderness after that. I kept the memory to myself, telling friends and family only that I had gotten lost and scared. But the forest left me changed. Even now, years later, I cannot be alone in the woods. The whispering haunts my dreams. Shadows flicker at the edge of my vision. I see shapes in empty streets at night. The forest lives inside me now, a constant reminder that I was never truly safe, and perhaps never will be. Whatever stalked me in Black Pine Forest is still there, watching, waiting, whispering, and I am certain it will never stop. These stories are not just tales, they are real experiences, and they remind us that the wilderness can be unforgiving, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying. If you enjoyed these chilling true wilderness horror stories, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there are more terrifying stories waiting to be shared. Comment below which story scared you the most, and share your own encounters with the wild, if you've had the courage to survive it. Remember, out there, the forest is always watching.